Moravian Church has a great heritage of sound doctrine based on the scripture, hymn singing, worship, fellowship, prayer, and a love of God.
The Moravian Church had its beginning on March 1st, 1457 in Czechoslovakia. While some of the worshipers might not have been able to read or write, they all engaged in fervent prayer. Prayer can transcend any boundary, and so prayer was held without ceasing.
The Great Moravian Revival of 1727, which reached its climax on August 13th, was preceded and followed by most extraordinary praying. The spirit of grace and supplications manifested itself as Count Zinzendorf led the people to the throne of grace from day to day. It was never a one-man prayer meeting. Instead, the entire congregation was totally wrapped up in the life of the church. Zinzendorf knew that they were in spiritual warfare and that the battle had to be won. He began to give spiritual instructions to make them more aware of their role on the spiritual battlefield. It was distressing sometimes when he saw how the people were living, but he took his refuge to the Lord in prayer, entreating him to grant to the congregation his grace and blessing. Zinzendorf's prayer was answered on August 13th.
After that distinguished day of blessing on which the Spirit was poured out upon the congregation at Herrnhut, the thought struck some brethren and sisters that it might be well to set apart certain hours for the purpose of prayer. It was the start of a great move of God. From 1727, what started as a trial prayer meeting lasted for 100 years. It was something unique. It was known as the hourly intercession, and it meant that by relaying of brothers and sisters, prayer without ceasing was made to God for all the work and wants of his church.
Prayer of that kind always leads to action. In this case, it kindled a burning desire to make Christ's salvation known to the world. It led to the beginning of modern foreign missions. The engine that carried the Moravian revival was prayer.
The story of the Moravian Church, however, did not begin there. It began in the 1400s with a mighty move of God. The Roman Catholic Church ruled and reigned supreme. Ills and evils were committed unabated. It seems as if it was a runaway train which had seemed unstoppable until God placed his hands on a man called John Huss. He was a Roman Catholic priest, but the evils in the church disturbed him immensely. The Spirit of God impressed upon him the need for honesty and moral integrity in the church. John Huss determined that, guided by the Spirit of God, he had to act.
A youth and young adult convention was held in August 2006 entitled Take It Back. The convention was held on the campus of the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, Trinidad, and was attended by over 200 young people from throughout the Eastern West Indies province. I was privileged to be at that convention. It was a deliberate move on the part of the young and youth of our church to call back, and indeed, to take back our church from a path of sin, formalism, and secularism, back to the path of righteousness and holiness. It seems as if John Huss, over 500 years ago, championed the same cause. Who was he, and what led him to the path that he took?
You know, John Huss was a professor of philosophy and the rector of the University of Prague in Czechoslovakia. Greatly influenced by the English reformer John Wycliffe, he advocated change in the Roman Catholic Church. Following ordination as a priest, he was appointed preacher at the Bethlehem Chapel in Prague, whose foundation stated that Czech and not Latin was to be used in worship. Huss, who was an extremely good preacher, attracted large crowds, and in his sermons was not afraid to attack evil in every quarter, whether the sins and vices were committed by kings or bishops or other pastors or members of the church.
Eventually, John Huss was excommunicated and summoned to the council in Constance to defend himself. Despite a promise of safe conduct, he was condemned to death without a trial and subsequently burned at the stake on July 6, 1415, his 46th birthday. Huss wanted to reform the Roman Catholic Church, but they objected vehemently. They saw him as a heretic or an upstart and tried to suppress and kill that Reformation spirit that he brought to see God's church cleansed and restored.
Points of protest arising from the teaching of Huss, that the sale of indulgences was iniquitous, that the laity should be allowed to receive the cup at the Holy Communion, that worship should be conducted in the language of the people, that Christ alone should be recognized as head of the church, that the authority of the Bible should take precedence over the authority of the church.
Martyrdom turned John Huss into a national hero. His followers swore they would revenge his death. His followers banded themselves together and called themselves the Hussites. They were so convicted and convinced about the move of God that was making through them, that 42 years after their leader, John Huss, was burned at the stake, the Moravian Church was born. It is this wonderful institution of which we are a part. One verse of a hymn by G. Komorowski, written in 1467, speaks powerfully to the work of the church. He gave us faithful men to lead and help us in our time of need. But Lord, upon is thine alone, and thou the work must carry on.
Today, July 6, 2020, marks 605 years since the martyrdom of John Huss. Though he lost his life, he ignited a move of God. The Moravian Church needs to rekindle its fire and do it again. But we need more committed soldiers. Will you stand up and be counted as one of those soldiers? John Huss, reformer and martyr, inspiration behind the Moravian Church.